esteemed colleagues. It is my pleasure to officially launch this online event, one of the 22 virtual sessions convened in the lead up to the 6th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the Minamata Convention on Mercury, or COP6, which will take place next month in Geneva. As we begin, I would like to remind everyone that the views expressed by speakers, moderators, and participants during this pre-COP6 event are their own and do not necessarily reflect the positions or policies of the Secretariat of the Minamata Convention. This session is co-organized with the Interim Secretariat of the Intergovernmental Science-Policy Panel on Chemicals, Waste and Pollution, which acronym is now ISP-CWP, at least as I pronounce it. This newly established independent body, launched in Punta del Este, Uruguay in June of this year, aims to strengthen the global science policy interface. As highlighted by the UNEP Executive Director at its establishment, member states have acknowledged that each dimension of the triple planetary crisis of climate change, natural loss, and pollution requires independent and inclusive science. With the formation of this new panel, the UN system now completes its trifecta of science panelists, as we have IPCC for climate change, IBES for nature loss, and now this new established pollution panel for the pollution and chemicals related crisis. The inaugural plenary session of the panel will be held in Geneva in February next year, and the series of preparatory events will be launched after COP6. Today's event will be moderated by Ms. Nalini Sharma from the Interim Secretariat of the new established panel. And before we begin, I would just like to share a few housekeeping notes. All presentations, the event summary, and the video recording will be made available on the event webpage as usual. Transcripts are also accessible in over 100 languages, as shown on the current slide. And feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A tool. We will incorporate them into the discussion if time allows. So with that, Ms. Sharma, the floor is now yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all participants joining from around the world. And thank you very much, Diana and the Geneva Environment Network for your support in organizing today's event. My name is Nalini Sharma, and on behalf of the Interim Secretariat of the Intergovernmental Science-Policy Panel on Chemicals, Waste and Pollution, the acronym is ISP-CWP, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this online event. This event is part of the Minamata 2025 pre-COP6 online series, as mentioned by Diana, and also contributes to the ISP-CWP's Road to Plenary 1 webinar series, which aims to foster dialogue and engagement ahead of the panel's first plenary session that will take place in February 2026 in Geneva. To formally open today's program, we are honored to be joined by two distinguished speakers. It is now my pleasure to invite Ms. Tessa Govese, Head of the Interim Secretariat of the Intergovernmental Science-Policy Panel on Chemicals, Waste and Pollution, to deliver her opening remarks.
Thank you, Nalini, and good day to all of you joining us for this webinar. My name is Tessa Govese, and I'm heading the Interim Secretariat of the newly established Intergovernmental Science-Policy Panel on Chemicals, Waste and Pollution, indeed ISP-CWP. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this online event, which brings together a diverse group of stakeholders to reflect on the science policy interface on chemicals and waste and the prevention of pollution, particularly in the context of the Minamata Convention and the newly established panel. As we are currently preparing for the first plenary session of the Intergovernmental Science Policy Panel on Chemicals, Waste and Pollution, scheduled for early 2026, to be precise, the 2nd to the 6th of February 2026, with stakeholder and regional consultations held on the preceding day, the 1st of February, hosted by the Swiss government in Geneva. And as we are on the eve of the Minamata COP6, today's discussion is both timely and important. The Minamata Convention and the science policy landscape around mercury more generally offers a wealth of experience in translating scientific knowledge into meaningful policy action. From global assessments and monitoring to effectiveness evaluations and trade measures, it provides relevant examples of how science can inform and guide international cooperation and action. The ISP-CWP was established on 20th of June this year with a clear mandate to strengthen the science policy interface to contribute to the sound management of chemicals and waste and pollution prevention. It's a long-awaited achievement, and we're very proud that the panel is here now, alongside the other science policy panels for climate change, the IPCC, and biodiversity and nature loss, IPBES. It's the culmination of calls that we have heard for many years from a wide range of stakeholders, ranging from governments to academics to NGOs, to strengthen the science policy interface globally to address the broader chemicals and pollution issues. And under the Chemicals and Waste Conventions, important work has already been done within their specific scope. So, as we begin the panel's journey, we are eager to hear more about the relevant examples and the existing mechanisms under the Minamata Convention and explore how we can build synergies, avoid duplication, and ensure that our work is inclusive, impactful, and grounded in real-world needs. After all, the work of the panel will be guided by its operating principles and approaches, including avoiding overlap and duplication of work and promoting coordination and cooperation with relevant multilateral environmental agreements, recognizing, of course, their independent and autonomous nature. I look forward to hearing your insights today on what has worked, where the gaps remain, and how we can collectively work towards a panel that is responsive, relevant, and ready to meet the challenges ahead. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your continued engagement.
Okay, thank you very much, Tessa. I now have the pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Isako Toda, who is the Senior Program Management Officer at the Minamata Convention Secretariat, to share his reflections. Isako, you have the floor.
Thank you, Nalini. Thank you, Tessa, distinguished participants. I am delivering on opening remark on behalf of Executive Secretary Monika Stankiewicz, who is on duty travel today. First of all, congratulations on the establishment of the Intergovernmental Science-Policy Panel on Chemicals, Waste and Pollution. Until last week, we have convened regional preparatory meeting for the Minamata Convention COP6 in Santiago, Geneva, Bangkok, and Nairobi, where Tessa and her colleagues kindly made a presentation on the panel. The presentations were enthusiastically welcomed. We felt great expectations from parties. For the upcoming COP6 to be held from the 3rd to 7th of November, we prepared a meeting document containing a draft decision welcoming the establishment of the panel, expressing its interest in establishing a partnership with the panel to advance the work to contribute to the objectives of the Minamata Convention, requesting the Convention Secretariat to cooperate with the Secretariat of the panel and seek observer status in the plenary of the panel, and requesting the Secretariat to conduct a scoping study on possible areas where the strengthening of the science policy interface would advance the implementation of the Convention with input from parties and in collaboration with the International Conference on Mercury as Global Pollutants, ICMGP, for consideration by COP7. I hope that COP6 adopts this decision and encourage the parties, stakeholders, and the Secretariat to make the best use of the opportunities for the science policy interface offered by the newly established panel. I am glad to have today all the key players as panelists, member states, civil society, and scientific community, including the Convention's Effectiveness Evaluation Group and Open-Ended Scientific Group, as well as the ICMGP. We look forward to the fruitful discussion here and the COP6 and follow-up activities, including ICMGP 2026 meeting. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Isako, and thank you both for your insightful remarks. We will now move into our panel segment, where we will hear from a range of experts and stakeholders. Each speaker has been invited to reflect on the science policy interface under the Minamata Convention and how the new ISP-CWP can build on their experiences. I'm now pleased to introduce you to our speakers. So I hope that we have Professor Jinwei Li, Executive Director of the Basel Convention Regional Center for Asia and the Pacific and Professor at the Tsinghua University, China. Professor Li, how are you? I hope you're doing well. I haven't seen you for a long time. We spent a lot of time together. Professor Li has been deeply involved in the global monitoring and assessment efforts. Could you please share with us your perspectives on how these processes strengthen the link between science, policy making, and policy outcomes, and their relevance to the new panel? Over to you, Professor Li.
Thank you, Nalini. Good morning. First, I can share the slides. Oh, okay. Thank you very much for supporting me to share. So, ladies and gentlemen, first I would like to express my gratitude to the Secretariat of ISP and the CWP for inviting me to attend this important event. The ISP-CWP, as one of the three science policy panels supporting to cope with triple planet crisis, is established in June 20 of this year by an intergovernmental meeting organized by UNEP. I'm sure that this is an important opportunity to learn from Minamata Convention, especially its use of the integrated GCMP data and its robust effectiveness evaluation mechanism. This can provide ISP and CWP the ideal blueprint to ensure its future assessment translates into impactful binding policy. Next slide, please. For years, the global environment architecture was incomplete, where we had the IPCC for climate change and for IPBES for nature, for biodiversity. We lack an equivalent global platform for chemicals, waste, and pollution. The establishment of ISP-CWP fills this critical gap. Its core mandate is to provide policymakers with authoritative, policy-relevant scientific advice. The ISP-CWP success depends how it can integrate existing data and translate complex science into unified global policy option. Next, please. The Global Chemical Monitoring Program provides a long-term comparable evidence need to evaluate the effectiveness of both the Stockholm Convention and Minamata Convention. Learn from GCMP experience. Number one is that the monitoring work must shift from sample inventory reporting to long-term impact assessment. Number two is the importance of capacity building, which through the monitoring infrastructure can be flexible, successfully filling data blank in developing countries, and even adopting to track emerging threats like PFOS in water. Next, please. Currently, UNEP is implementing the third phase of global chemical monitoring program worldwide to address the data gap in developing countries. As the regional center for Stockholm Convention, my team is supporting 19 countries in Asia-Pacific region to generate a high quality and comparable data, which will significantly contribute to the global POPs and the Mercury database, thereby stressing the global data foundation. Next, please. The Minamata Convention effectiveness evaluation process provides a science-based governance blueprint The open-ended scientific group focus on scientific integrity, summarizing data trade from monitoring. The effectiveness evaluation group take that scientific report, compare it with the mandatory Article 21 national reports on policy implementation, and process into a final report to COP and present recommendation for improvement, lesson learned, and best practice to the COP. The two distinguished group mechanism is a model to ensure that this can deliver science that is high policy relevant but remain non-prescriptive. Next, please. Minamata experience confirm science policy can induce concrete policy action. The assessment directly support COP5 decision to adopt new phase-out date for mercury-added products and to finalize guidance on BET and BEP. Taking China as an example for the implementation of the Minamata Convention, locally generated scientific information has been proved to be a key element in formulating national policy. Chinese researchers have developed a high resolution species-specific mercury emission inventory. This precise domestic scientific knowledge has greatly enhanced legitimacy and credibility of policy making. Next, please. ISP-CWP's rules is not to duplicate the Minamata or Stockholm Convention. Its mission is to be the system integrator, looking beyond a single convention. Its unique value lies in filling the thematic gap, such as horizon scanning for emerging threats and analyzing pollution across the entire value chain. The ISP-CWP is designed to deliver comprehensive global assessment on issues like chemical mixture and diffuse pollution that are too complex for any single MEA to address on its own. Furthermore, ISP-CWP needs to identify key research gaps in the field of chemicals and waste management, guide the direction of scientific research, and promote effective communication between scientists and the policy maker. Next, please. To guarantee policy impact, I hope that ISP-CWP could identify its strategic priorities. For example, structurally, it must formalize a governance mechanism to ideally distinguish scientific rigor from policy relevance. Its work program must be demand-driven, actively seek and prioritize assessment requests from MEA COPs or from member states, ensuring its output meet a clear political needs. In conclusion, we have in GCMP this proven data foundation. We have in the Minamata mechanism this robust governance model, and now ISP-CWP has the opportunity to be a global system integrator. All these efforts will to form a clear, healthier future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Lee. Our next speaker is Ms. Katarina Stepkova, Director of the Stockholm Convention Regional Center for Capacity Building and the Transfer of Technology in the Czech Republic. Katka, as a long-standing expert in science policy processes, including under the Minamata Convention, could you please reflect on the role of effectiveness evaluation in the science policy cycle and how this could inform the ISP-CWP. Over to you, Katka.
Thank you very much, Nalini, and good day to everyone. Thank you for inviting me to this workshop and allow me to share a couple of thoughts with you. As a follow-up to what has been just presented by Professor Lee, building really on a decade-long experience of both global monitoring plan under the Stockholm Convention and also on the more recent experience of building the framework under the Minamata Convention. I think it is really important to have in mind and really strengthen the not only data generation, but their harmonization and making sure that we are doing it in similar procedures, in having the data that is fully harmonized and that is comparable, that the quality assurance, quality control processes are in place, because that will really strengthen our evidence base knowledge on the scope of the problem. And regarding the effectiveness evaluation, being participated in 3 cycles of the Stockholm Convention evaluation, and currently also under the Minamata Convention Effectiveness Evaluation Committee, I can not really emphasize strongly enough need of availability of information sources that are really structured, that are coded, that are in the sense predictable, so that the indicator structure is well set up. And I think that over the years, we have managed to have such a good structure and framework established at the Stockholm Convention. And I think that we are now going through the process, doing it for the first time under the Minamata Convention, that we are learning and we are identifying challenges and not so clear information flows and what we will need to improve for the next time. So, Nalini, to the question on what is needed under the ISP-CWP, I see its role broader than just MEAs, and because it is really a next pillar that is critically important for UNEP, for overall chemicals management. And I think we haven't yet heard the global framework of chemicals, and we haven't yet heard of other instruments, be it Montreal Protocol and be it that means that deals with ozone depleting substances. But we also have other chemicals that are not part of the Stockholm Convention or Minamata Convention that require our attention and that need to be managed properly. And so I would hope that the way how we establish the framework under the Intergovernmental Science-Policy Panel that we have established so far, and the groups and expert bodies that are to be established, will allow us to have knowledge and information that is available both from government, but also from scientific society, and also from international organizations and networks such as global research infrastructures that I would say that really guarantee that it's a harmonized state-of-the-art knowledge that is necessary for policymakers to make their decisions. So I would hope that the framework that was mentioned by Professor Lee, established by ISP-CWP, will allow not only to bring in the latest and the most robust scientific evidence, but also look very creatively yet sensibly at the resources, information sources that are used, and really partner with those that bridge the knowledge gaps and bring in the necessary information that we lack for making the really effectiveness evaluation of our chemicals management. I don't know whether I have responded to all the questions. If there is any follow-up questions, please let me know.
No, thank you very much, Katka. Really insightful remarks there, and your reflections are very helpful. We will, of course, have a Q&A after this, once we have heard from all of the panel members, and then we can come back to you, of course, if there is request for a little bit more additional information, any more thoughts. So thank you very much. So my next speaker is Mr. Dominic Bali. I would like to say Porcro, but I hope I say it properly, from the Centre Africains pour la Santé Environnementale from Côte d'Ivoire. Thank you very much for being here, Dominic, and really congratulations on finishing your PhD on the ASGM. We look forward to hearing your perspectives on local implementation realities of the Minamata Convention, especially in artisanal and small-scale gold mining, and the importance of strengthening the science policy interface at that level. So over to you, Dominic.
Thank you so much, Nalini. Introduction. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, distinguished participants. It's an honor for me to contribute to this collective reflection on the lessons of the Minamata Convention and the emerging priorities for the ISP and CWP panel. And I would like to, before starting, express my gratitude to the Secretariat of the Intergovernmental Science-Policy Panel on Chemicals and Waste and Pollution for inviting me to be a speaker at this event today. And as a practitioner actively engaged in local implementation, particularly in the artisanal and small-scale gold mining sector, I would like to share some field realities that often remain visible in the global policy space. And these realities highlight the urgent need to strengthen the science policy interface so that data, local knowledge, and community voices can meaningfully inform decisions. Next slide, please. So I'll briefly explore these issues in three parts, especially the field observations, the implementation challenges, and strategic levels for a more inclusive and actionable science and policy interface. Next slide, please. So as you may notice, we see that ASGM is an activity prevalent in three main regions, especially Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and I would say South Asia. But we have all the Asian countries which are, and Southeast Asia especially, which are also practicing artisanal and small-scale gold mining, which is practiced with several techniques, including mercury amalgamations. As we all know, ASGM is the largest anthropogenic source of mercury worldwide, and the informality of ASGM sector is responsible for high mercury use. Additionally, we have the increase of gold gold price at global level, which is also responsible of miners also trying to direct to increase their incomes. Especially for that, they are using a lot of mercury at all costs, and at the end, this is weakening the Minamata Convention implementation at country level. Next slide, please. So as you may see, in terms of challenges, as I was saying, we have the limited integration of local knowledge, some institutional and regulatory capacities gaps. We still have some socioeconomic tensions. And in terms of limited integration of local knowledge, we notice that there is a difficult access to scientific information, especially for regulators and even policy developers. And we have some few transposition of research results into accurate policies. And we also notice a lack of stakeholders inclusion and even the lack of involvement in addressing scientific challenges related to ASGM mercury through the Minamata Convention debate. So that leads to also the ineffectiveness of ASGM anti-mercury legislation, attributable to several factors. We have the licenses challenging due to bureaucracy and corruption, as you know. We also have some administrative gaps linked with the non-understanding of the ASM ecosystem and even the environmental classification of applicable to ASGM in several regulations at national, sub-regional level. And we also noticed that there are some challenges in domesticating the multilateral environmental agreements from borders porosity and lack of proven efficiency of mercury-free technologies related to income generation necessity, especially. So that leads to some socioeconomic tensions in which miners and site owners and even the communities searching for profit. And most of the time, the national budget increase and the multiplication of tax sources add to the pressure that miners and even this, I would have say, opportunities and necessity miners are facing with. Next slide, please. With regard to strengthening the science policy interface, I think that we need a co-production of knowledge based on policy questions to be addressed by scientists, especially the open-ended science group on effectiveness evaluation for the Minamata Convention is trying to address some of them, especially the main one will be what are the current levels of mercury in the environmental matrices from ASGM sites. This is a key question that needs to be answered, and even the information that needs to be provided will serve to answer to design or reshape the policies that are existing. We also think that another question will be the definition of the actions that are derived from the knowledge generated to address ASGM mercury under the Minamata Convention framework, and how different actions taken operate a change in mercury reduction or even elimination in ASGM sector. That leads to the structured and inclusive dialogue that is requested, especially by identifying the key stakeholders to be involved in that mercury ASGM debate. And finally, we think that the digital tools and indicators are something that are quite important also. We think that the design of new policies, the regulation, and even the activities to address the institutional and regulatory gaps in ASGM mercury solutioning under the Minamata Convention are key. And for that, we need some technical tools associated with specified indicators which will be developed to solve ASGM mercury dilemma. Next slide, please. So in support of the initial roles that presented the distinguished Professor Lee, I just would like to echo my voice in presenting, in highlight on some roles that the ISP-CWP panel could even work on, especially I think that the local realities of ASGM reminds us that implementing the Minamata Convention cannot be separated from the social, economic, and environmental context in which it operates. And to translate this international commitment into concrete and lasting action, it is essential to strengthen the science policy interface by valuing local knowledge, structuring dialogue, and equipping institutions. So the ISP-CWP panel offers a unique opportunity to build these bridges, integrating field voices into mechanism for assessment, monitoring, and decision making. Thank you. I hope I have been able to answer to all this information, and I would like to thank you for your attention and for your commitment also to making science a level for inclusive and transformative action. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dominic, and very comprehensive presentation there. I just want to remind all our participants that if you want to raise any questions to any of the panel members, please do write them in the Slido box, which you can find on the right-hand side. At the bottom, the icon looks like a cube. So do feel free to post your questions already, and as we kind of move through the other panel members. So thank you very much, Dominic. And next, I would like to introduce Ms. Vanessa Aliaga, the Second Secretary, Permanent Mission of Peru to the United Nations Office and other international organizations in Geneva. Welcome, Vanessa. Nice to see you. Vanessa, you have been actively engaged in both the Minamata Convention and the open-ended working group process that has led to the establishment of this new panel. Could you please share member states' perspective on bridging the multilateral environment agreements and science policy interfaces that is translating Minamata priorities into potential early areas of work for the new panel? Over to you, Vanessa.
Absolutely. And first and foremost, let me thank the ISP-CWP Secretariat, the Geneva Environment Network, and everyone involved in organizing this really timely event. So to address your question, I think one of the important things to remember is that the ISP CWP, and I'll just refer to it as ISP for the sake of brevity. The ISP's mandate is broader. Some of the speakers before me mentioned this, and so being a panel that will address more than just mercury, I think it's interesting to look at what kind of commonalities would exist in terms of challenges, in terms of knowledge gaps, what commonalities exist across all types of metals for member states. And so when, having been looking at this portfolio for about 3 years now, I do want to preface it by saying that I'm not a scientist. So my lens on it is a little bit more from a policy perspective. But I do identify a couple of important gaps and challenges that would be interesting to see the ISP target. And one of those would be, for example, more precise exposure data and mapping of contamination, but as it moves. Something that we've seen in the Peruvian context is that we see maps that show, there's been a contamination site here, or there are high levels of mercury here, but not how that contamination would move through river networks or through wetlands and through food networks. So eventually the policies that are implemented to try and intervene at these sites fall short, because we've seen that, the pace at which contamination moves the policies would simply not be at the right pace, and they end up being ineffective. So one thing that would be useful for the ISP is to develop kind of high resolution monitoring to help policy responses, so that the enforcement, so that in health interventions and any kind of remediation efforts aren't just reactive to the contamination site, but are actually better at identifying where the contamination might spread to, and that way address kind of the magnitude of the problem. And this is true, I think, beyond mercury. And another area is looking beyond perhaps just mercury, because at least in the case of Peru, a lot of the focus goes to the use of mercury in gold extraction. But there are other contaminations from metals that come from like the tailings dams, and how that would then become like a chronic contamination with water and crops and fish. And this is, we see this in arsenic and lead, copper. And so there's limited data on these broader, like across all these types of metal contaminations. And there is also little data on how the comparison between contamination in humans and contamination in the ecosystem. So there's a lot of focus on humans, or separately, a lot of data on ecosystem, but not exactly the nexus and where those kind of shared exposure points are, or how to trace how that exposure becomes present in humans. So that would be an interesting way to kind of integrate research so that it's not fragmented in metals, or fragmented in populations and spaces that are contaminated. Finally, I think and this is mercury specific, one area that would be important for the ISP to work on is more comprehensive research on alternatives to mercury. There's some field trials and some pilots, but there's not a lot of information in Peru, and I'm sure in other countries as well, on the costs, the impacts on certain vulnerable populations, with a gender focus, indigenous communities, the environmental impacts of the alternatives. There's some barriers to access to the alternatives, and And so it would be good to have this kind of comprehensive assessment of the alternatives, so that policy designers can and decision makers can decide in which alternatives to invest in, to fund, and to try and promote. And similarly, we see that monitoring of different metals is fragmented across different agencies, and each agency has its own methodology, its own standards, and their own regulations on collecting information and on sharing information. So this makes it difficult to compare apples and oranges when they're both monitoring contamination of the same metal. So this, it would be very useful to have guidelines on standard ways in which to monitor contamination by different types of metals. And then another element that is very challenging to address just from a national perspective is cross-boundary contamination. I think I mentioned earlier that rivers will take a lot of contamination from one area to a different area nationally, but this is also true, obviously, internationally. There's the example of the Putumayo River in Peru that flows down from Ecuador into Peru. And we had large communities becoming quite ill, and there wasn't clarity on where their contamination point was coming from. Ultimately, it was determined that it was coming from Ecuador, and it was very difficult to first conclusively demonstrate where exactly the contamination site was, and then jointly agree on a way to address that and remediation. And it was very difficult, and so it would be helpful for an external party, an external panel, to give some guidance on this types of situations. And finally, I think just capacity on a national level to improve the capacity of labs and the personnel, and to try and find and identify funding sources. That doesn't necessarily have to be housed within the fund or managed by, that the fund or wouldn't need to be housed within the panel or managed by the panel, but simply an assistance in identifying and garnering international funding on this area of work. I think that those would be, at least from a Peruvian perspective, the shared challenges across all metals, and the type of work that the ISP could aid in developing. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Vanessa, and also sharing a little bit broader than on the Minamata Convention. So thank you for sharing your reflections here. I will now pass the floor to our next speaker, Ms. Elena Limberit Setimo, who is the Policy Manager, Zero Mercury Campaign, International Coordinator of the Zero Mercury Working Group at the European Environmental Bureau. So Elena, civil society organizations have contributed significantly to the science policy processes. We would appreciate your reflections on civil society engagement under the Minamata Convention and its relevance for the new panel. So over to you, Elena.
Thank you, Nalini. Good morning, good afternoon to all participants. Thank you once more for the invitation to share our work and experiences. We can go to my slides. Thank you. We welcome also the establishment of the panel, as in many cases chemicals pollution is actually invisible. So such a panel could help bring more attention to this major crisis. As Nalini said, my name is Elena Limberidi. I've been leading the mercury work at the EB and the Zero Mercury for over 20 years. We can go to the next slide, and just shortly to present the organizations. The European Environmental Bureau is the largest network at the European level, and together with a US NGO back in 2005, we founded the Zero Mercury Working Group, which is an international coalition of more than 110 NGOs from over 55 countries. And indeed, we have been following the mercury work for over 20 years. Next slide, please. So I tried to look at the questions that indeed were put by the organizers. and looking at the mechanisms under the Minamata Convention, and which are translating the scientific knowledge. I mean, we have seen that since the very beginning, obviously, the global mercury assessment brought the science on the table, and this eventually led to the discussions that led to the adoption of the convention. And then, obviously, many of the way the operational articles of the convention are made, they do require scientific knowledge, and so that decisions can actually be made. The same is happening now when we're actually trying to strengthen the convention. More data is brought on the table, and this leads to these changes and to strengthening and to making amendments to the convention. And then again, the mechanisms through the COP, which request actually the scientific evidence and analysis, leads to reports. Then we can see some like the mercury trade on mercury compounds, and eventually all the evidence that is required for the effectiveness evaluation, as it has always been discussed. Here on the slide, you can also see some of the elements that the NGOs have been bringing on the table along the years, and since the very beginning, so since before the convention was adopted, and this also contributes to the decision making. Next slide, please. Then in terms of the data partnership and how can this provide the basis for informed decision making, here what comes to my mind is that obviously when something needs to be developed, the Secretariat asks for information. So beyond these calls, we are lucky also to have the UNEP Global Mercury Partnership, which coupled with the International Conference of Mercury as a Global Pollutant, have been and can facilitate data and knowledge sharing. And this has been a really great platform for collaboration. And obviously, as we said, the panel can consider all of these evidence that is gathered through there, but also can fill in a potential gap, and in terms of capacities that will be needed to fill these gaps in data. Also, the data generated by the different projects funded via the GEF, the UN, WHO, or the EU, or other mercury-related projects, these bring a lot of data on the table, but then again, as was mentioned earlier, some harmonization and creating a basis for all this data, that would be quite important. And also something that potentially the panel could facilitate is the collaboration and transparency with industrial stakeholders, as this needs to improve, as in some cases the non-transparency can lead to like information being blocked, and then the burden being more on authorities to bring this knowledge, and then this eventually would delay potential decisions. Again, the NGOs and civil society can help bridge such gaps, and I can refer to this a little bit later on. Next slide, please. So in terms of the knowledge gaps, yeah, for mercury, I mean, here I've been looking more on the mercury side, and now listening to the other panelists, there are more ideas that come to mind. While there is quite some research going on and studies are in process on mercury supply, stocks, how the recycled mercury is being used and where it's going, mercury compounds, and also obviously all of these, the use in ASGM, but also how mercury is used in other products and what can be the alternatives like vaccines. And these could be areas that could be addressed, and they haven't been looked at the Minamata level. Also, as I will discuss also later, the mercury added skin lightening creams has been an issue that has becoming a lot now into the attention, and looking more into the exposure patterns from e-commerce sales, studies on chronic mercury poisoning and multi-system effects these are areas that could be quite helpful for policymakers and for the countries to deal with such complicated issues. We call the skin lightening creams issue like the SGM of the products area. Also, the interaction of other chemicals with mercury, sometimes within products. This is something that could be looked at. And then, yeah, as it was mentioned, the input that the ICP could play to the effectiveness evaluation, looking also at the interlinkages between climate change and mercury releases, and how can this maybe consider in the effectiveness evaluation, but overall. And also, for example, looking into mercury in fish. We had done some studies over 10 years ago. The mercury that is allowed in fish, which goes into the market, is more of like a marketing tool, I would say, and it doesn't potentially look at what is safe for the people. So there are several elements in terms of mercury in fish, and you may have heard that there have been some bans in schools for eating tuna in France and in some other countries. So these are elements that the panel could potentially help look at. So as I put here, also presence in humans and the environment, and mainly also having data from the global south. So having a database or like a one-stop shop for academic papers or other research for mercury, but also for other metals, that could be something very useful. And we have been discussing also at the very beginning about cadmium and arsenic, and these discussions are still ongoing. So these are elements that the panel, I think, could help with. And then just a few other, next slide, please, a few other reflections. Ensuring resources for inclusive and equitable participation and capacity building would also be very important, considering regional and national needs, and also involving local scientists and training these local experts. That would be something quite useful. Also to identify the wider range of data and bridge the gaps with wide geographical coverage. Colleagues also have brought to my attention that the indigenous expertise and knowledge to have a more holistic understanding. This is something that the ISP could look at. For example, looking at the implementation of the UN Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People. Also looking at emerging environmental issues, like it has happened also with this early work that I mentioned, that we have been working on skin lightening products. Something else to be considered is the transparency. That would be quite important, so that information and analysis, scientific information analysis, can be used to support this policy decision, facilitate the science and that this can become easily understandable for CSOs, but also local governments and local policymakers, so that they can make better use of it. And finally, look at the risk tolerance or ethical concerns, which, while they are not strictly scientific issues, they require broad societal input to properly use the science and to make it policy. And just going to the next slide, this is just one example of some contributions to on knowledge that we have been bringing since 2017, where we have analyzed over 1,000 skin lightening creams. We have a global database, and together with the work ongoing now, we are trying to assist the governments on the implementation and enforcement, and also putting the finger on the online sales and different elements that have not been looked at earlier dates. And I would like to thank you with this. Thank you very much.
Super. Thank you very much, Elena, for sharing these reflections from your perspective. I would now like, last but not least, invite Professor Asif Qureshi from the Indian Institute of Technology, Hyderabad, and also member of the Executive Committee of the 17th, in fact, International Conference on Mercury as a Global Pollutant, that will take place in October of next year in Hyderabad, India. So well, the conference has been instrumental in advancing the science policy interface on mercury. Could you please share your views on how academic networks contribute to these processes, for example, through this international conference? Asif, I'll just perhaps ask you to try and be as brief as possible because we are running out of time. We're coming up to the top of the hour. Apologies, you're always the last speakers do suffer a little bit, but I think, yeah, if go ahead, please.
Yeah, let's move on. Thanks, Nalini. So welcome everyone. My brief is, as she said, to present, we can go to the next slide. Present the view from the academic side and more specifically the ICMGP. Next slide, please. So what is ICMGP? It's the International Conference on Mercury as a Global Pollutant, which is a very focused academic people who are working on all aspects of mercury cycle. So it can start from emissions to processing to health and policy. In general, and that's the reason I guess for this session, the relation between ICMGP / the mercury community and the convention / the secretariat is also considered a success story. So we can examine how or why. Next slide, please. So if you see on your screen's left side, you have the mercury emissions map with orange and yellowish colors, more higher emissions to the atmosphere, and then the tick marks are the places where the conferences has been. The green mark is because the conference is next year, not yet happened. The green is India. So increasingly, the conference is doing a good job of spreading geographically. Of course, you can see a lot of spots, so more needs to be done, but there is an effort to move and cover these important places. So we are making a good geographical coverage. Having said that, all the past countries or the past hosts are still represented. In that, there is an advisory board, so that can transfer its knowledge to the next conferences, and therefore there is a continuity. So we are spreading, but also maintaining the continuity. Next slide, please. So the previous people had the wisdom to very early recognize the relation between science and policy, and I just copied the conference themes of the past many conferences since 2011. And if we see the themes themselves, 2013 already science informing global policy, today's action saving the future, then integrating mercury research and policy in a changing world. 2019 also, I missed highlighting it blue, but bridging knowledge on mercury, human welfare and policy response. Then 24 from Minamata to Africa and beyond. And for 26, we have reaching 10 years of enforcement of Minamata Convention. So 5 actually explicitly have recognized the importance of the work that the scientists are doing and its relation to the Minamata Convention itself. So the scientists themselves are very aware that their work, how it relates to the convention. Next slide, please. Then there are the plenaries, which again highlight the relation of work to the convention. So in 24, there were already plenaries on effectiveness evaluation of the convention. Then artisanal, and we listened to the talk earlier, artisanal small-scale gold mining, lessons from African initiatives to the world. In 26, we already have a plenary, which would be somehow like either exactly or similarly worded as global policy progress and implementation. So these are the plenaries themselves. In addition, there are many general and special sessions which are of direct interest to the convention addressing. For example, in 26, we have planned on effectiveness evaluation. These have not yet been announced. Modeling mercury to inform international policy. So again, we're talking about policy, illegal gold mining, biomonitoring, tools for health and policy. So always people are aware that toxics in cosmetics, and then science and policy interfaces. So even the sessions themselves, we are targeting people who are working on these particular aspects, which actually directly contribute to the interest of the convention. Next slide, please. So in addition to spreading geographically, also the people themselves are more and more from other countries than the traditional ones. For example, in the last African conference, we had the largest the participation from the African continent. So even the community is becoming more diverse. Next slide, please. So in ICMGP 26, of course, we don't know who the participants are going to be right now. But if you see on the left, the executive committee, we have the committee formed from different parts of the world and also like south and the north. Same goes for scientific steering committee. What's also there is we have a very good mix of gender. So 3 of the 7 people are female in the executive committee, 9 of 14 in the scientific committee. And also there are people of different ages, so like really senior people and people who are just starting. So there is always this knowledge and the importance of the science and its relation to policy being transferred from one generation to another through this conference. Next slide, please. Then that was the conference itself, and then about the networks. So previous speakers have already talked about networks or how they should be targeted or focused. So in Mercury, we have the advantage, or fortunately, we have several networks like APMN, Asia Pacific Monitoring Networks, US National Monitoring Program, and the GMOS/GOS Forum networks, which are providing observational data, which in general are directly relevant or maybe of direct relevance to the decisions or the discussions in the convention itself. So the conference networking is there, and then people are working together to provide the information. Next slide, please. So it's not only the scientists doing, but the convention the convention secretariat is also engaging with the science community. For example, we have the Minamata online sessions. So we have series of Mercury science or policy relevant talks and also scientific talks, and it helps the objective, right? The objective of the Minamata online is to support government officials, stakeholders of the international community to engage with the science also. So and then there is an example of expert meeting on mercury emissions and release, which was just adjacent to the scientific conference, the ICMGP. So it works both ways. It brings attention to the ICMGP conference through engagement of policymakers in the convention's expert meeting. It also brings attention to the convention for the scientists who are going to attend the ICMGP conference. So there is an active engagement on both sides of the whole mercury concept. Next slide, please. So what are the lessons from this? There is a continuous two-way communication and cooperation of the Mercury scientific community with the convention or the secretariat. And there is an advantage here because the ICMGP is a dedicated exclusive conference which focuses on all things Mercury. And we also have a dedicated convention which focuses on all things Mercury or considers things on all things Mercury. So all the discussions in ICMGP can be directly accessed by the convention. All the priorities and thoughts from the convention can be communicated to the scientific community through this kind of a conference. And it helps both parties understand each other's results and requirements and adjust or readjust their approaches so that they benefit each other. This is in contrast with several conventions where there may not be really an exclusive dedicated convention. So how can we translate this? Next slide, please. Only two slides. So if we look at the goal of the ISP-CWP as I took from the pamphlet, we need to access knowledge, identify policy options, and catalyze and strengthen the science policy interface. And what we can learn from previous is to effectively obtain evidence, there has to be coverage in two broader categories: the geographical and geographically spread stakeholder presence. So you have global north, but also global south, and more specifically, more and more the emerging economies, and also those which have natural resources, but those resources are of course of interest to a lot of other people. So you have to have more stakeholder presence from these areas. Then the science topic itself, right, from emissions to processes, exposure, disposal. So the entire life cycle has to be covered within a single platform. Next slide, please. So one of the potential way forward could be like having a dedicated theme meeting with tailored sessions which can target to specific chemicals or specific ways, maybe specific locations, or all of them within different themes of the sessions, and possibly can also leverage from existing institutions made for engagement with networks. For example, you have country level institutions, Swissnex or Max Müller-Baumann, but there are also other SDG networks and institutions. But there is always, the take home is to have a continuous two-way engagement with scientists spread in all parts of the world and maybe that will help a better integration of the science and policy. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Asif. So with that, participants, we will have concluded our panel session here. We would like, of course, now that we have we had identified some time for Q&A, we've really run out of time, and really thank you for your patience for staying on. But I think we can move quickly to the closing session of this webinar. And to close the event, I'm pleased to invite Ms. Heidi Morka, Policy Director at the Ministry of Climate and Environment of Norway, to deliver closing remarks. Heidi, you have the floor.
Thank you, Nalini. First of all, I would say that the establishment of the ISP is very much appreciated by Norway. This new panel represents a significant milestone to address the planetary crisis of the chemicals, waste and pollution area. And from today's presentations, we learned that the science policy interactions that contributed to the development of and also the implementation of the Minamata Convention and all the important related activities they offer the valuable experience when we will now operationalize the new panel. The first open-ended working group of the Global Framework on Chemicals is behind us. And just ahead is the COP6 of the Minamata Convention. UNEA 7 will take place in December. And by then, the report requested by UNEA 6 on lead, cadmium, arsenic, and organotins will be available. I'm then reminded the fact that we have not done enough to address heavy metals at the global level. However, for several heavy metals, we have sufficient knowledge of their hazards and the problems they cause across the globe. But we do not always have the necessary knowledge on technical and economically viable alternatives to act decisively and at a world community. So the binding policy outcomes have been achieved for some uses regarding the mercury. And at Minamata COP6, one test regarding the possibility for further action is how far we will be able to reach on the issue of dental amalgam. This is a major source of mercury pollution and yet still widely in use, also despite the availability of feasible alternatives. We need to move beyond a chemical by chemical approach towards more integrated strategies. And this is also relevant for many of the issues of concern identified under SciChem, for example, the group of perfluorinated substances, the PFASs. The ISP can play a role here. More generally, when knowledge gaps for necessary action remain, I hope the panel will contribute and provide basis for joint global efforts based on data already available or pointed out by the panel to be needed. This must also include information sharing to regulators, industry, and the general public, especially in the global south. So finally, we look forward to the operationalization of the panel in the near future and encourage all governments and stakeholders to actively support the forthcoming first plenary session in February 2026, with the aim of swiftly agreeing on the procedures to enable the panel to begin the substantive work as soon as possible. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Heidi, and thank you all speakers and participants for your engagement. I think we had very good presentations by the speakers, so there weren't very many questions. There was a question about whether the recording is going to be available, and the Gen colleagues have put in the link to where it will be made available. We will also have it on our new panel's website. We hope that today's discussion has provided some useful perspectives of the work ahead, As I mentioned, this recording will be made publicly available, and We, as the Interim Secretariat, we look forward to your continued collaboration as we move forward to organizing and planning for the first plenary session of the Intergovernmental Science-Policy Panel on Chemicals, Waste and Pollution. Wishing you all a very productive day. Thank you very much for your patience as well. We've gone a little bit over time, and I'll now hand back to Diana if you want to make some final remarks.
Thank you very much, Nalini. Indeed, I will kindly ask my colleague Claudia to announce what's next, because we will soon be again live with another online event.
Thank you very much, and thanks to all our panelists. Yes, indeed, we will be having another Minamata COP6 online event starting shortly at 13 p.m., where we will highlight the impacts of mercury exposure on the rights of indigenous people and ways to address them. The link to register, it's available in the chat. And furthermore, I will kindly bring to your attention another event where the Geneva Environment Network will be supporting the Minamata Convention on Mercury. This is an event taking place on the eve of the beginning of COP6, where we will feature a film screening as well as an important discussion on the Minamata Convention. And finally, we look forward to meeting you all at the Minamata COP6 at our booth that will highlight the efforts of the International Geneva in addressing mercury pollution. So thank you very much for being with us, and see you at the next event. Thank you.
Thank you all.